Thanks, Katie. And I'm excited to be here to talk about this topic. One thing about Appalachian State that I want to mention is we're not a land-grant school, and it's just the point that a lot of this education takes place in all kinds of areas, and many people are doing education in this field. I think it's important to talk about, two things here is looking at what sustainability is, and then also the education point. So I think when we ask that question, what is sustainability in poultry, I think that students do need a broad view of it. But as we've heard in some of the last talks, we don't want it all to be superficial either. I mean, there's a lot of topics, but we do want some very deep learning and deep work. But I think a global development perspective is a good way to look at sustainability. And then we'll talk about education. You know, to me, it does mean, we are talking about education mainly with undergraduates, so helping prepare our future workforce, that I think we need real participatory engagement and robust discussion, because we are teaching students to address very large social challenges. And feeding ourselves sustainably is not the only one. You know, there's all kinds of challenges that we're looking at. You know, we're looking at health issues, we're looking at pandemics, but it's kind of a convergent science approach to work with students looking at a broad area. So in terms of sustainability issues, you know, we know that the growth of the world population, that poultry will provide about a third of meat globally for 10 billion people by 2050. So it is important that we look at the sustainability of poultry meat production. It's a very high quality protein, but we do have to examine the impact on the environment, including climate change, loss of biodiversity, addressing pandemics. We need to look at equal benefits for people and for society, and of course, the welfare for poultry. So one thing I like to do is use kind of a dual approach. You know, again, there's a lot of approaches to look at sustainability, but what I like to do is put efficiency on one end and robustness on the other. And so it's a continuum is really what we're looking at. On one end, we can say, yes, we know that chickens are efficient converters of feed to meat. And it's also very good news in poultry production that they really don't have enteric methane production. I mean, they can actually be carbon neutral depending on how you raise chickens. So, and we can compare that or just look at it on the continuum with a certain amount of robustness, because we have talked some about, yes, high efficiency, even efficient in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, you know, efficient in that sense. But just how vulnerable are we? You know, sometimes with high efficiency does come high vulnerability in the supply chain. And can you stand up to challenges? Because we know there's going to be all kinds of challenges. So one thing that is robust turns out to be nature-based following an ecosystem. So agriculture that actually works within the ecosystem, and that does mean nutrient cycling, it means a large amount of diversity with interactions, and it doesn't depend on fossil fuels. So there's a lot of ways to look at this, and I like to, again, use kind of a continuum, use even a matrix here, to look at some comparisons between scale, large scale, and then small and mid-scale, but also the approach. So I'm not saying that either one of these is better than the other. I think personally we need all the tools in the box right now with the types of societal challenges and emerging diseases and things that we face. So it is a bit of a matrix. You know, on one hand, large-scale production is worldwide. Small and mid-scale production it actually functions more on a bioregional basis. And when you're functioning on bioregional, That's where you can cycle nutrients much more effectively, and that's where you can also get input from your communities. So it is based more on relationships. On one hand, energy efficient housing. On another hand, if it's free range, it might be open housing. Compared to controlled environment, access to the outdoors, sometimes in large-scale production we do use, for efficiency, the fast-growing genetics, but we might consider differentiated genetics in other systems depending on what the environment is. You know, do we want the chickens to match the environment that they're raised in? High-performance feed compared to using circular feeds. It might be an alternative type of feed, but again, this is where the nutrient cycling can come in, and the fact that chickens can eat things that humans don't eat. Targeted health care and holistic health care, kind of the One Health concept. Centralized slaughter at large facilities. During the pandemic, or since the pandemic, we've noticed that the U.S. government has provided actually quite a bit of funding recently to smaller and mid-sized slaughter plants. So that's, I've just noticed a lot of funding coming through in the past 3 years. On one hand, we look at economies of scale. On the other hand, we'd look at resilience and robustness. Sometimes, are we trying to change? Are we going to keep it at status quo? Do we have what we want? So there may not be any change involved. It might be status quo, or it might be what we often talk about, continuous improvement, or it might be significant change, which might be transformative or redesign. So I think we can look at all of these things as we talk about sustainability. We are, of course, familiar with large-scale intensive meat production. I think this can actually be most appropriate, especially where we have large populations of humans. Once we start talking about where humans live intensively, that's a really good place, for our meat production to be intensive. If we have other areas that, we're all trying to feed ourselves, we might be looking at some of the small and mid-scale poultry systems and housing. So that may be stationary houses with outdoor access that could include some rotation of yards still, or it might be small portable houses. Some of the images here at the top, that is actually University of Arkansas, the USDA Organic Research Facility in Savoy. Here is an image lower down of, I think this is one of the images that Purdue Foods is doing with some pastured broilers. And then small houses, that one is actually on the right from the internet. Or it may just be shelters that you're using. There may be rotation, there may be extensive areas, rotation. Some of these small portable houses are basically shelters. Those are actually my research pens at Appalachian State. If we look at genetics, depending on the system that we're using, we may be using of course, hybrid meat birds. The fast-growing bird is one that we use for a high level of efficiency. For robustness, we might actually choose another bird that's more suited to foraging. So there's all kinds, this is an example from Hubbard Breeders from the internet, just of all the different types of males that can be used with some of their very robust females. Standard breeds actually come into play if people are trying to do some of their own breeding. It may not be a 4-way cross, but some people may be working more with a 3-way cross, and the standard breeds do come into play, like New Hampshire. And again, you can see some of these breeds are actually named for the place that they were developed, because there was such a close tie between the bird and the environment and its fitness for that environment. In any case, the conservation of genetics is always important, so we have that raw material to work with. If we're looking at feed crops, typically it is grain and pulse crops that are used in most types of poultry production. And, as we're talking about climate greenhouse gas emissions, if we're using that grain for our chickens, then we really do need to make sure that we're building organic matter with the crop production. That's kind of looking at the cradle to grave that I think Ryan was talking about. You know, we really need to look at how that feed is produced, and that's an image of no-till at the top. That was cover cropping with a rye cover crop. Knocked down, the soybeans were put in. So it's just an example of what reduced tillage or no-till looks like, the type of crop production that keeps the carbon in the soil. And actually, you know, agriculture can be an incredible sequestering of carbon. So building the soil with our crop production, with chickens, looking at circular feeds, so that could be using, actually, again, things that humans don't eat. It might be cull crops or byproducts. I did try, in North Carolina, there's a lot of sweet potato production. These are not sweet potatoes. These were some beets that we were harvesting at our university farm at one point. But using cull sweet potatoes as an energy source for chickens, and actually did ferment it, and that's a way to, you know, reduce some of the mold or things that might be on the sweet potato. And chickens actually really liked the fermented sweet potatoes. It may be insect production, and this is just an image of what a little farm-scale insect, you know, using food waste can look like. So, you know, black soldier fly can live in that type of unit and actually reproduce. When we look at poultry health, of course, we know it's preventing the introduction of disease, using biosecurity, using vaccination, and using this whole One Health concept that we talked about at the beginning, that, you know, just the interconnected basis of health in terms of animal, human, and planet health. And often, you know, looking at the responsible use of antibiotics is an important part of that. With slaughter and processing, again, there's been a lot of money that has come in recently for small plants, not so much for this, you know, super small mobile type unit, but I did want to show a picture at our university farm. It's not really a university farm, it's more of a departmental farm because we don't have land grant type funding, and we work like small farmers work, just on a shoestring. So this is what our mobile unit, when it goes out, we can tarp it, and this is an example of using that on a partner's farm. And some of the partners that came for training that day, there was a gentleman in a wheelchair that used to process chickens, and the family said he really wants to participate again. And I was just thrilled that, you know, this is a family's basketball court where we're processing the chickens, and, you know, they pushed his wheelchair up here so, you know, he could also participate and see the slaughter of chickens again. In terms of diversity interactions, when you're growing birds and crops on the same farm, for example, that's where the manure can provide fertility for the crops. Animals do contribute very much to diversity, to biodiversity, and that's something I just remind my students all the time, that we really do need animals in our ag production systems. You know, animals, well, for one thing, they provide that manure, fertility for the crops, but animals are a key part of sustainable agriculture and systems that are more successionally developed, more mature ecologically than just annual cropping. And as I mentioned, you know, poultry absolutely can be carbon neutral. You know, they're using the current carbon just like we are. So, you know, the atmospheric carbon that is fixed by plants. And, you know, I think these are examples of kind of some of the deep learning that deep attention that we can do to, you know, with our sustainability topics. You can't get much deeper, you know, than ecology, that, you know, the carbon is fixed by plants, especially when you have no-till type systems, building the soil with the plants, the corn, and then, of course, you know, the chickens are going to be eating the glucose. And, you know, we're not eating the chickens so much for glucose. It's really more, you know, not for energy, but for protein. But still, that carbon does cycle back eventually to the atmosphere unless you sequester it in the ground, and you can do that with the soil organic matter, with the waste, with stover, and in the form especially of humus, that's going to be a much more resilient, recalcitrant type of carbon in the soil that's not going to break down. And even biochar, using biochar is something that's going to be carbon negative. It's actually going to pull the carbon into the soil. So as long as we're keeping the carbon in the soil and not burning, the fossil fuels, this can contribute very much to sustainability. So we also, I think, need a diversity of production. My definition of sustainability is productive yet fertile, or productive yet regenerative in the case of animals. And I think we need all the tools in the box. So intensive animal production, I think, is particularly applicable to cities, high human populations, but in rural areas with lower human populations, we might have the opportunity for more extensive production, integrating crops with livestock. One thing I think we do need to look at is equity and justice. I guess in the review that we did, the survey that was done about a year ago, social justice did not rate very highly for any of us to look at in sustainability. It was one of the lower rated, but agriculture does have food-producing roles, of course, economic, wealth-producing roles, environmental roles that we've just looked at. I mean, with our chicken production, crop production, we can sequester carbon in the ground. It also has social roles. And so I think we need to ask that question, how agriculture and food systems can support people and society equitably. And I think, it's important. I think, the framework that Ryan mentioned, y'all are looking at farm workers, employees. That's a really important part to look at. Where is the benefit? Where is the money going? Where does the power lie? So these are things that we really need to look at when we talk about social justice. As an example, I'm working with a project. It's the SAS, the Sustainable Agriculture Systems Poultry Project, led by University of Connecticut. This was one of the big SAS projects. This one was funded about in 2020. And there's actually a meeting this evening if folks are interested in learning more about this project. It's listed in our schedule. And there was a symposium last year, too, at PSA that really looked at the sustainability of broilers, especially with the impact of restricting antibiotics. We really need to look at this. What is the carbon footprint of restricting antibiotics? Is it going to take more carbon, take more resources to produce birds? So looking at bird health, bird welfare, of course, reducing the antibiotic resistance, using antibiotics responsibly, and then exploring alternative feeds such as insects, the cycling of poultry litter, looking at human health, looking at food safety, consumer stakeholder outreach and engagement, and then an overall assessment of socioeconomic, environmental. And then part that I'm working on is the education of our future workforce, students. And that does tend to be undergraduate students as our future workforce. So this is a concern that we all have about making sure our antibiotics keep working, and looking at antibiotic alternatives can be part of this. In terms of education, again, this is led at the University of Connecticut. So one of my colleagues is planning a course this fall on current trends in sustainable poultry production. It's going to be taught at the undergraduate level and also at the graduate level to look at the sustainability of broilers and what is this impact of reducing antibiotics. So looking at bird health, controlling necrotic enteritis, coccidiosis without antibiotics, looking at bird welfare, controlling in human health, controlling Salmonella and Campylobacter, reducing the antimicrobial resistance spread, and then also a very strong focus on environmental health, alternative feed ingredients, recycling poultry litter, and there is some work with this project on biochar that I find really interesting, protecting our water quality and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So this is going to be a 16-week in-person 3-credit course, and this is the pilot, this fall at University of Connecticut. We have a strong interest in converting it to something that would be also online. And so they do have, at Connecticut, they do have the folks that can help convert an in-person 16-week course to online. And I think trying it out first, maybe next summer as a summer course. But I think there's all kinds of ways that we can teach this, and people don't have to enroll, to be able to teach sustainable poultry topics. And I think that really, the roundtable, that opportunity that we'll have in a few minutes is a good way to gather more input about what y'all think undergraduates need to be taught about this. And ways to teach undergraduates. The experiential learning is a really important part of learning. Making sure, like on our university farm, we do, normally try to keep, we have a diversified farm, but we normally try to keep flocks of chickens and show how we're doing research. And also that everybody can do research. I mean, undergraduate research can be very exciting to work with undergraduates. And farmers are the biggest researchers I know. I mean, they try something different like every week, it seems like. So, kind of democratizing, this type of research, making it very accessible to students that want to try some things out. This is what our poultry research looks like. We do have a portable brooder on pasture. Again, those are the grow-out pens. I've got small pens so I can do replications. And then when we use our mobile unit, we park it under cover. We don't use the tarping system as much, but that's how we, teach students about humane poultry slaughter on farm. And we've also been incorporating sustainable poultry topics into our coursework over a period of time. At University of Arkansas, some of the small animal farming courses. I actually taught a course last fall eating meat, eating animals in the Anthropocene, because we have a lot of students that ask us, can I be sustainable and still eat meat? And I'm like, absolutely yes. And actually animals are a key part of sustainable agriculture. We think it's important too to provide a global perspective, and so this is an international perspective that we're doing. Some of the group traveled to India about a year ago, about a 3-week period working with a lot of undergraduates, and we're planning one in Mexico in the coming year. So we're talking to some colleagues at UNAM in Mexico. As we look at training the future workforce, which are our undergrads, often we talk about things like, well, we need them to be able to work on teams. We need them to be able to communicate effectively. We need them to work across disciplines, to be able to do convergent approaches, convergent science. And we need them to think critically. We need them to care and empathize deeply and to engage responsibly as citizens. So these are some of the things that we're also looking for, with undergraduates. Taking action for positive change, that's really what sustainable development is, the department that I work in, and working for the greater good. But what's interesting is there's also very high return on investment for poultry science BS in North Carolina. Our state just did a return on investment of all different types of undergraduate degrees, and poultry science was just about at the top. So students may be working, for engaging responsibly and working for, helping out, service in the world, but they're also, it's an incredible investment in their education and jobs that they can get later. So with this type of robust engagement, the answer in the classroom, it's not predetermined. It's not a foregone answer. So that's what the discussion is, how to look at sustainability. And some companies invite this type of engagement among their customers and even their critics. And I've been impressed, reading and participating once in what Purdue Foods does in terms of their Animal Care Summit every fall. They actually do invite some of their critics. And, it's interesting, to see they invite their employees, they invite their farm workers. And it's a really interesting thing to ask. And I think maybe that's one thing the framework can ask is, are you, companies, are you asking your customers and stakeholders, about sustainability? And it's also a way to develop leadership, I think, for the future. So just a few contacts and acknowledgments that I do try to keep some of these types of topics online at App State in the forefront to talk about. This is the SAS Poultry Project at UConn. It includes about 13 universities. My information, and this is the AFRI Sustainable Ag Systems project that supports it. And then there is a meeting at 6 o'clock this evening in Morrow if you're interested in learning more. Thank you.